Hi.
My name is Madison, and I'm 30 years old. If you looked at me today, clocked in for my hospital shift, coffee in one hand, calm expression on my face, you'd never guess what happened just a few nights ago. You'd never imagine that behind the bandage I wear on my forehead or the carefully applied concealer under my eyes lies a story no makeup can erase. But stories like mine rarely show themselves in full. They drip out little by little until they flood everything. It was Thanksgiving night, the kind of night that always felt more like obligation than celebration in our house. Our family dinners weren't warm or joyful. They were tense performances, each of us playing roles we no longer believed in. My mom, Patricia, with her tight smile and sharper tongue. My dad, Charles, hiding behind his newspaper and muttered judgments. My younger sister, Sophie, always trying to stay out of it. And my brother, Brandon, the golden child. Charming on the outside, cruel underneath. That evening, the house smelled like dry turkey, too sweet wine, and false peace. I was in the kitchen alone, scraping bits of cold stuffing into the trash, while the dishwasher hummed behind me. I wasn't trying to start anything. I really wasn't. I just asked a question. So, Brandon, I heard Mom and Dad sign the house over to you. Is that true? He turned from the fridge, a beer can in one hand, and gave me that smug half-smile I'd known since we were kids. The one he used right before twisting the knife. Why do you care? He said casually. You never really lived here after high school. Always acted like you were too good for this place. I kept my voice steady. That's not true. I was just working. But I was always there when it counted. When Dad had his stroke. When Mom was sick last spring.
He scoffed.
Flying in from Asheville every few months doesn't count, Madison. I dried my hands, looked at him, and said quietly, I just think, if the house was going to be passed down, maybe all of us should have been part of that conversation.
I didn't yell.
I wasn't angry. I just wanted to be included. But he exploded anyway. Before I could react, Brandon grabbed the heavy ceramic vase from the kitchen counter. In one violent, blur-fast motion, he swung it hard against the side of my head. The impact rang in my skull like a bell, white-hot pain blooming instantly. I staggered, losing my footing, one hand flying up to my temple as I tasted copper in my mouth. And then came the second blow directly to my nose. The vase cracked with the force, and something inside me cracked too. My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, blinking through tears, stunned and breathless, as warm blood poured down my face and onto my shirt. I could hear the football game playing in the background. No one had turned it down. I was hurt.
Badly.
And I was still alone in that kitchen. My ears were ringing. I remember that more than anything, the soundless, pressure-filled ringing like I was underwater. I tried to sit up, blood now dripping steadily from my nose onto the tile floor, warm and terrifying. My fingers curled around the edge of the countertop as I pulled myself up, unsteady and dizzy, one eye already beginning to swell shut. Somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps. I thought, maybe, finally, someone was coming to help. But it wasn't help. It was my mother. Patricia walked into the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel like nothing had happened. She looked at me, really looked, and then narrowed her eyes. It's just a scratch, she snapped. Stop being so dramatic, Madison. I opened my mouth to speak, but I was still gasping for breath. I reached for the phone on the wall with shaking fingers, trying to dial. I barely managed to press the first two numbers, 9, then 1, when her hand snatched the receiver from mine. The phone slammed against the floor and cracked. Enough, she hissed. Always trying to ruin dinner. Always making everything about you. Blood was running down my face. I couldn't even hold my hand steady to wipe it. I looked at her, blinking through the red and confusion. It's not just a scratch, I whispered. She didn't even flinch. You always do this, she said coldly. Turn things into a scene. It's exhausting. I turned my head toward the living room where my father, Charles, was still sitting in his recliner, the TV flashing reflections across his glasses.
He didn't look at me.
Didn't stand. Didn't ask if I was okay. There goes the drama queen again, he muttered without moving. And just like that, I knew I was completely alone in that house. I stood there, swaying, blood-soaked and trembling, waiting for anyone to intervene. But no one did. Then I saw it on the floor. My bracelet. The leather one I wore every night at the hospital. A dying patient had given it to me during her final days. It had snapped off my wrist during the attack and lay there now, soaked in my blood. That bracelet meant something to me. Like I meant something to someone at least. But not here. Not in this house. I bent down slowly and picked it up, holding the broken strap in my shaking hands. I took one last look at my mother, my father, the glowing TV screen. And I turned and walked out the front door. The cold slapped my skin like a wake-up call. I stood there for a moment, waiting, half hoping someone would follow, ask if I was okay, say they were sorry, offer to take me to the ER. But behind me, the door creaked shut. Nothing. I wiped the blood off my face with my sleeve and whispered into the winter wind. They don't see me. Then quieter, stronger. But they're going to hear me. 2 days later, I pulled into the staff parking lot at the hospital, the morning sky a dull steel gray overhead. I had barely slept, barely eaten. The swelling around my eye had deepened into a dark, angry purple. My nose was tender, the bridge taped lightly, the skin beneath still split from the blow. I'd done what I could with makeup in my dim bathroom, but some wounds are louder than concealer. I walked through the employee entrance, head down, badge clipped to my coat, avoiding eye contact with the early shift staff already gathered in the break room. I could feel stares, those quick, confused glances that said, "She wasn't like this yesterday." Inside the small staff bathroom, I shut the door and leaned against the sink, heart pounding. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glare onto the mirror. I looked at myself. I looked like a victim, but I didn't feel like one. Not this time. I pressed a cold paper towel to my cheek, not because it helped, but because it gave my shaking hand something to do. My breath caught as I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to cry. I wouldn't give them, any of them, that power again. A soft knock made me jump. Madison. It was Bella, one of the newer nurses. Young, kind-hearted, and still full of the kind of hope I remembered losing years ago. I opened the door slowly. She blinked at my face and quickly looked down at the coffee in her hand. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, then hesitated. "Are you safe?" She didn't ask what happened. She didn't press for details. Just one question, "Are you safe?" It caught me off guard. I nodded, lying because it was easier. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just slipped on some black ice." Bella handed me the coffee. "Well, here. I figured you'd be tired. You always take first calls, even on holidays." I managed a smile. "Thanks. That's sweet." We walked to the break room together. A few other staff nodded silently. No one pushed. No one asked. But I could feel it. The difference between strangers who saw bruises and said nothing, and coworkers who saw me even when I didn't say a word. It was more kindness than I'd gotten from my own family in years. On my first 10-minute break, I sat near the lockers, coffee cold in my hands, and finally checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. Not from Sophie. Not even a "how are you?" Just one message. From Sophie. "Don't stir up drama. You know how Brandon gets. Just let it go." Those 5 words stung worse than the broken nose. Let it go. I stared at them until the screen dimmed. That was the moment it hit me. Even my sister thought I was the problem, not the bruises, not the attack, not the silence afterward. Just me. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling tiles. And then, without thinking, I reached into my bag, pulled out a small notebook, and opened to a blank page. Across the top, I wrote, November 28th, 2024. Orbital bruise, 6.5 centimeters. Minor laceration to lower lip. Upper back tenderness, likely contusion from impact. Incident, assault by male sibling during family gathering. My hand shook, not from fear, but from a kind of icy certainty. I kept writing. Age 7, pushed off swing. Age 9, locked in shed. Age 13, tripped downstairs. Age 17, called hysterical for speaking up. Age 25, excluded from family financial decisions. Age 30, struck with vase.
Bleeding.
Gaslit. Again. I flipped to a new page. The list kept growing. For the first time in my life, I was looking at it all in one place. And it wasn't a collection of random moments anymore. It was a pattern. If this were a patient file at the hospital, we would have flagged it, reported it.
Protected them.
But because it was just family, it had never counted.
Until now.
Later that night, after my shift ended, I sat alone in my apartment, the notebook still open on the kitchen table beside my untouched dinner. The walls were silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the low hum of the fridge. This one, thankfully, not the kind you get slammed into. I couldn't stop reading the list I'd written. It didn't look like my handwriting. It looked clinical, detached, like I was writing someone else's file. Maybe that made it easier to face. I was halfway through copying a few of the details into a digital folder on my laptop when my phone lit up. Vanessa. I hadn't spoken to her in years, since middle school, really. We'd drifted apart like most childhood friends do. But the timing. I answered. Hey, Vanessa? Her voice was hesitant, careful. Madison. I know this is out of the blue, but do you have a minute? I stood from the table, walking slowly toward the window.
Yeah.
Of course. What's going on? She exhaled heavily. Do you know a girl named Mia? I froze. My niece. Brandon's daughter. I said slowly. Why? She's staying at your parents' place, right? I turned away from the window, heart rate rising.
Yes. Why?
She said something strange this morning. Vanessa continued gently. She told my sister that Brandon pushed her. That he said she was acting like you. That she was being dramatic like Madison. The air left my lungs.
What?
She was crying, Vanessa said. And her wrist looked swollen. She told her mom he pushed her when she tripped, and when she started crying, he told her to stop faking it. Called her sensitive. She said it wasn't the first time. I closed my eyes. The room felt smaller. She's 8, Madison, Vanessa whispered. The same age you were when... She didn't finish.
She didn't have to.
I thought maybe I was overthinking, she continued. But when Mia said your name, like it was something shameful, I got chills. And I remembered things. I sat down hard on the edge of my couch. You did the right thing calling me, I said, my voice low. Are you okay? She asked. No, I said. But I will be. We hung up a few minutes later, both shaken. I sat still, staring at the wall. Then I picked up my notebook again. I turned to a fresh page and wrote across the top. New generation.
Same hands.
And underneath that, do I speak up and risk everything again or stay silent and let another little girl learn silence the way I did? I stared at the question, and then I whispered out loud, more to myself than anyone else. Do I become the woman I wish someone had been for me? The next morning, I drove to my parents' house under a sky that hung heavy with clouds, like the air itself knew what I was about to do. I told myself I was only going to drop off groceries, eggs, milk, that oat milk creamer Mom liked for her tea. That was all. That's what I told myself. I rang the bell out of habit, even though I still had a key. Charles answered the door with the usual coldness in his eyes. Well, he said dryly, look who finally stopped sulking.
I didn't respond.
Just stepped inside and headed toward the kitchen. Patricia was there, smoothing her blouse, adjusting the table settings like we were preparing for some kind of country club luncheon. You look better, she said, barely glancing up. Glad the swelling's gone. Before I could respond, I asked, do we still have the old baby blanket? The one from when I was sick as a kid? She barely looked at me. Check the attic, maybe. I nodded and walked toward the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The pull-down ladder groaned as I climbed, my shoulder still aching from Brandon's attack. The attic was hot, stuffy, thick with dust and forgotten things. Boxes lined the walls, holiday decorations, bags of unused clothes, old furniture. I spotted a faded trunk in the corner, wedged between a broken chair and a Christmas tree wrapped in plastic. On the top of the trunk, scrawled in childlike handwriting, were the words, "Family 1989 to 2001. My chest tightened. I flipped the lid open. Inside were photo albums, thick and sticky with age. I opened the first one. Page after page, Brandon. His birth. His first haircut. His Halloween costumes. His football games. His graduation. Every milestone preserved like a shrine. I kept flipping, faster now. Where was I? A few family photos, group shots. But even in those, I was often in the background or cropped at the edge. And then I found it. A half-burned album. The cover warped from heat or moisture. The pages stuck together. Most photos had been torn out, but one page remained. A corner of a birthday cake, pink frosting still visible. And in messy purple marker, Madison's Day. I remembered that cake. I had begged for strawberry with cream cheese frosting. I remembered what happened that day too. Brandon had wanted the pink ribbon from my birthday dress. I said no. I hid it in the laundry basket. He found it. He ripped it from the dress and shoved me into the linen closet, locked the door from the outside. I was 8. I screamed. I kicked. Then I cried. Then I just went quiet. Hours later, when I heard footsteps outside the door, heels clicking, I called out. It was Patricia. I saw her shadow pause at the door. And then she walked away. No one came for me until morning. In the attic, holding that warped album, that torn photo, I felt the air leave my lungs. But I didn't cry. Instead, I closed the album, tucked it under my arm, and climbed back down the ladder, careful, controlled. I walked past my mother in the kitchen. She didn't even ask what I found. And I didn't say goodbye. I just left. Back in my apartment, I laid the album on the coffee table and reached for the box on my closet shelf. Inside were scraps of the life they tried to erase. Hospital visit summaries, the broken bracelet, a folded note Brandon had once slid under my door. You're not worth the air you breathe. I didn't throw it away. That night, I began taping it all to my wall.
Piece by piece.
The bruises, the photos, the memories, the proof. And in the center, the half photo for my 8th birthday. Above it, I wrote in bold black marker, "The case against silence." 2 days later, the phone rang. The name on the screen stopped me. Patricia. I hesitated before answering. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice almost rehearsed. "How about dinner tomorrow night? Brandon and Camille will be there." I thought we could move on.
Move on.
Like none of it had happened. Like the bruises had faded. So the truth had too. But a part of me, maybe the part still holding on to hope, whispered, "Go." "I'll come," I said. The next day, I stopped at a florist. I don't know why. Habit maybe. I picked out pale yellow tulips. Gentle, harmless, neutral, like I was trying to be. The porch light was already on when I arrived. Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted meat, warm and staged. Patricia stood at the stove, smoothing her lipstick in the reflective oven door. "You look better," she said again. Same words as before. No mention of what had caused the damage. I followed her down the hall, tulips in hand like a peace offering. "Mom," I began quietly. I was in the attic. "I found that old album, the one labeled 1989 to 2001. She paused, spoon in hand, her back to me. "There were barely any pictures of me," I continued. "Did Brandon take them out? Or was it you?" Her shoulders tensed.
She still didn't look at me.
"You always made everything so heavy," she said. "Crying on your birthday. Sulking at Christmas. I told your father, you've always had a flair for theatrics." "You tore them out?" I asked, almost breathless. She finally turned, smoothing the front of her blouse. "You were always too dramatic, Madison. Not everything is an attack." Then she walked past me to check the rolls in the oven. No apology. No pause. Just years of emotional erasure packed into one dismissive smile. Dinner began like a photo shoot. Perfect table setting, crystal glasses, flickering candles. Brandon sat across from me with his fiancée, Camille, and her wealthy parents, making small talk about vineyard tours in Sonoma. My nameplate was at the far end of the table, near the swinging kitchen door. Out of the spotlight. As usual, Camille leaned toward me with a laugh. Brandon told us how you once locked yourself in a closet over a ribbon. So dramatic. Patricia chuckled. She used to do that all the time. So sensitive. Brandon added, one time she bumped into a doorknob and made Dad cancel his poker night like she was dying. Laughter. Easy. Cool. I kept my hands in my lap, fists clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. And then it happened. Brandon reached across the table for the bowl of mashed potatoes, laughing loudly. His elbow knocked into a teapot, full of freshly boiled water. I saw it tilt. I saw it spill. And the scalding water poured straight into my lap. The scream tore out of me before I could stop it. The pain was instant and searing, crawling across my thighs like fire. I shot to my feet, the chair legs screeching against the floor as I stumbled back. Everyone froze. And then Patricia sighed. That was your fault for sitting so close. Brandon gave a smirk. Guess you should have picked the other seat, huh? I staggered to the kitchen, face pale, breath shaking. I pulled open the freezer. Only a bag of old peas and half-frozen ice trays. I grabbed a towel, ran cold water over it, pressed it to my burning skin. No one followed. I stayed in there alone, letting the pain numb into something colder. When I returned, they were laughing again. The conversation had resumed. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't screamed. As if I hadn't been burned. I stood behind my chair for a long moment, and then I walked out of the room. This time, I didn't wait for the door to creak behind me. I didn't give them the chance. Back at my apartment, I changed into soft cotton pants. The skin on my thighs was red, blotchy, and still burning despite the cold compress I kept pressed against them. But the pain that sat in my chest, the knowing, that hurt worse. I sat on the edge of my bed with my old notebook open in my lap. I started a new page and wrote 2 headings. People who were silent. People who helped hurt. Underneath, I listed the names. Patricia.
Charles.
Brandon.
Sophie.
And then I stopped. There was one name I hadn't thought about in years. It came from nowhere, as if the pain reached back and dragged it forward. Miss Clark. My 8th grade music teacher. I remembered her warm cardigans, the way she closed her eyes while students played the violin out of tune, the soft voice she used when no one else was kind. I remembered her glancing at me once during a recital when my sleeves were too long for spring, and I winced while playing. The memory clung to me. I picked up my phone, searched my old email archives, and found her name. I hesitated, heart pounding, then typed.
Hi.
I don't know if you remember me, but I never forgot you. Before I could overthink it, I hit send. I didn't expect a reply. But the next morning, a letter was in my mailbox. A real letter. Handwritten. Folded into a cream envelope. No return address, just my name in soft cursive. Madison. Inside were 2 pages. Asterisk, Dear Madison. I don't know if you remember me. I was your music teacher in 8th grade. I have thought about you for years. I saw the bruises. I filed a concern. I remember your parents coming in. I remember the threats. I was young. I was afraid. I let it go. But I shouldn't have. I've kept my journal from that year. I kept the complaint form. If you ever need someone to confirm what you lived through, I'm here. I'm sorry. I didn't fight harder back then. Asterisk. I reread it twice, then just sat with the paper resting gently in my hand like something sacred. Someone had seen me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't dramatic. I called her that afternoon. Miss Clark? I said, voice shaking. There was a pause.
Then,
Madison, oh my. I didn't think you'd call so soon. We talked for nearly an hour. She still had everything, her journal, the original complaint. She told me that people like Patricia count on silence. Yours and everyone else's. And that if I ever needed her testimony, she was ready. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Project Witness. It felt like drawing a line in the sand. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. For the truth. To say, this happened. And it wasn't okay. I had just saved my files and stood to pour myself a glass of water when a sharp knock rattled my door. I opened it, and there stood Charles. No warning, no greeting, just that stiff jaw and cold stare that used to shrink me as a child. "I heard you've been talking," he said, stepping one foot inside without invitation, digging up things that should stay buried. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "You're going to ruin what little reputation we still have," he said. "But go ahead. Just don't think there won't be consequences." He turned to leave, then looked back one more time. "You were always a burden, Madison. No matter what lawyer you think can save you." And then he slammed the door. I stood still for a long time. Not in fear. In clarity. I sat back down at my laptop, clicked open Project Witness, and whispered to the quiet apartment. They never loved me. They loved the power they had over me. And for the first time in years, my hands didn't shake. After Charles left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the soft hum of the screen the only sound in the room. Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance. Inside, everything was still, except for me. I stood slowly, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out my old backup drive, a small, dusty silver rectangle I hadn't touched in years. I used to store everything on it before cloud storage took over. I didn't expect much. Maybe some blurry college photos, old music files, scanned documents. But when I plugged it in, something caught my eye. A folder. KBKP 204. I didn't recognize the name. No memory of creating it. My hand hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked. And everything came rushing back. There they were. Photos.
Of me, bruised,
Swollen. Eyes red and glassy. Skin blotched in shades of violet, yellow, fading green. A timeline of pain. I must have taken them years ago and buried them, both literally and emotionally. They were unedited, unfiltered, just truth. One image showed the deep cut on my collarbone, another the bruising across my jaw. In one, my arms were crossed tightly over my chest, my eyes vacant like I'd already left the room inside myself. I stared at the screen, frozen. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated it. I had documented it. And then, I had forgotten it. Not because it wasn't real, but because they convinced me it wasn't important. I copied the entire folder into my new encrypted drive. Project Witness was no longer just a name. It was a map out of the silence. Once the upload was complete, I stared at the blinking bar, my mind still reeling, heart thudding quietly in my chest. Then my phone lit up with a call. Vanessa. I answered, unsure why she was calling again. "Hey," she said softly. "This is going to sound strange, but do you have a minute?" I moved to the window, breath catching slightly. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "It's about Mia." My whole body tensed. Vanessa exhaled sharply. I didn't know who else to ask. "But Mia's been saying things. She said Brandon told her not to cry like you. She said he pushed her again. That her wrist hurt. And..." She hesitated. "And this morning," she said finally, she whispered to her mom, "I'll be quiet if it means I don't get locked outside again." The room tilted. "She's only 8, Madison," Vanessa said, voice trembling. "Same age you were." I sat down hard, like my body couldn't hold the weight anymore. "It's happening again," I whispered. "Same house. Same words. Same hands." Vanessa was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't want to bring this up if..." "No," I cut in gently. "You did the right thing. Thank you." We hung up. I stared at the wall. My eyes drifted to the photos taped there, to the birthday picture, the cracked bracelet, the scars I no longer needed to hide. Mia was walking into the same darkness I'd spent my life crawling out of. And I had a choice to make. Do I stay quiet? Or do I become the woman I wish someone had been for me? I already knew the answer. It was time. The next day, I returned to the house. But not as their daughter. As their reckoning. I stood on the porch holding a warm peach pie in my hands, wrapped neatly in a dish towel, Mom's favorite. It looked like a gesture of peace. But it wasn't.
It was camouflage.
The door opened.
Charles again.
He gave a short, bitter laugh. Well, look who came crawling back.
I smiled, small and even.
Thought I'd check on Mia. He stepped aside, letting me in without a word. Inside, the house smelled like garlic, lemon cleaner, and denial. Patricia was in the kitchen, arranging cutlery like we were expecting a dignitary. "Peach?" she asked when she saw the pie. "Fresh from my kitchen," I replied. She nodded once. "Set it by the window. Dinner's almost ready." We sat at the dining table like actors at a play we'd performed 100 times. Same centerpiece. Same folded napkins. Same unspoken lies woven into every thread. Brandon arrived last, trailing in behind Camille, whose voice floated like perfume. I waited. I waited until the salad had been served, until the wine had been poured, until the room was at its most false sense of calm. Then I set my fork down and said quietly, "I found something." The table stilled. I was going through an old drive. Found photos. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Charles's hand froze halfway to his mouth. Patricia's wineglass paused midair. "You have 72 hours, I said evenly, eyes steady on both of them, "to tell the truth publicly. Or I will." Brandon snorted. "What truth?" I didn't look at him. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want accountability." Charles leaned back, his tone hard. "You really think people will believe you over your own family?" "I don't need belief," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I have evidence, documentation, and Mia." The room rippled. Patricia's face tensed. Brandon shifted. "You can bury me again," I said. "Or you can start digging your own graves. Your call." Then came the soft sound of footsteps.
Mia.
She stood in the doorway clutching a coloring book, her eyes wide. Before I could speak, Patricia's voice snapped like a whip. "What did I tell you about eavesdropping?" Mia flinched. "You want to end up broken like her?" she shouted, pointing directly at me. "Keep snooping around." Mia stepped back, lips trembling. Not crying, freezing, like prey. I stood slowly from my chair, napkin falling to the floor. I looked directly at Patricia and said, with terrifying calm, "You just confirmed everything I needed." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream. Instead, I walked into the kitchen. The pie sat untouched on the counter. I reached for the upper cabinet beside the fridge. Way in the back, behind dusty jars, was my old teacup. White porcelain, blue vines along the rim. The one I used to drink chamomile tea from when I pressed frozen spoons to my face at night. I placed it gently in my purse and zipped it shut. As I walked toward the front door, I glanced once toward Mia's room. Her door was open just a crack. I could see her peeking through, silent. Let them think I was bluffing. Let them think I'd walk away again. But this time, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I left with my truth. And my teacup. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from focus. I sat at my desk with my headphones on, replaying the same audio file over and over. Mia's voice, barely above a whisper. "Mommy, please. I didn't mean to drop it. Please don't shut me out there again." Then came Patricia's voice. Cold. Controlled. "Well, maybe if you listened the first time, you wouldn't be punished. Go." I paused the recording and closed my laptop, chest burning with rage and certainty. They wanted to call me dramatic? Fine. Let them see what undeniable sounds like. 2 days later, I walked into the community school board meeting held at the town hall, a modest auditorium with folding chairs and a plastic water station by the back wall. The place buzzed with polite conversation and small-town ceremony. On stage, seated front and center, were Patricia and Charles, dressed in their best. They were being honored that day, a legacy award for decades of service to youth programs. I sat quietly in the back, a flash drive in my coat pocket. The board chair began with warm compliments about their strong family values and unwavering commitment to the next generation. I didn't flinch. I waited. And then she asked, "Would anyone like to say a few words?" I stood. Polite heads turned, a few surprised. Patricia's head whipped around. Charles stiffened. I walked calmly to the podium and plugged in the flash drive. I just have one thing to say. I began. Before you give out any honors today, I think you should hear this. I pressed play. Mia's voice filled the room.
Soft. Scared. Real.
Then Patricia's voice.
Hard.
Familiar. The room was dead silent. A few gasps. Someone near the front muttered, "Oh my God." A teacher covered her mouth. A man behind me whispered, "That's her?" When the audio ended, I stepped forward. "My name is Madison. I'm their daughter. And that little girl, Mia, is walking through the same hell they let me live in." A hand went up. A music teacher in the second row, Mrs. Zerman. I reported a bruise on Mia's arm last spring. I followed the process. But no one followed up. Another voice from the back. "We live next door. We hear screaming every Saturday. We didn't know if it was our place." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in that house. Then Charles stood, pulled a folded paper from his blazer pocket. His voice trembled with tightly held contempt. "She's unstable. She was hospitalized for mental illness 3 years ago. Here's the documentation." He held it high like a shield. I didn't move.
I didn't have to.
From the back, a woman's voice rang out, measured and powerful. "That's not accurate." Everyone turned. Dr. Nicole Harper, calm and poised. "I'm the physician listed on that file. Madison was treated for physical injury, not mental illness. That file has been altered. It's a forgery." You could hear a pin drop. Charles's hand lowered slowly. His face turned the color of damp paper. I stepped up to the front again. Quietly. No need to raise my voice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the teacup. "I used to drink from this while holding ice packs to my face," I said. "They told me I dropped it, that it cracked because I wasn't careful. But I kept it, because I knew one day I'd pour the truth back into it." Security moved toward the stage. "We're going to need you both to come with us," an officer said. Patricia and Charles didn't fight.
They didn't yell.
They just stood, stunned, as the room parted around them. As they were led away, not as heroes, but as abusers whose shadow had finally been pulled into the light. And near the exit, standing small but steady, was Mia. She clutched her backpack and stared at them as they passed, eyes dry, jaw tight. She didn't blink. She just watched, like I once had. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I made tea, not chamomile. Just plain black.
Strong.
Hot. I sat at my small kitchen table, the city quiet beyond my window. The lights in the distance flickered like small breaths. Inside, everything felt still. Not peaceful, but steady. On the shelf above the counter, I placed 2 teacups side by side. One was mine, the old one, with the hairline crack running from rim to base. A chip near the handle, stained just slightly from old tea. And beside it, a new one, white porcelain. Delicate blue forget-me-nots painted around the edge. Unbroken. Waiting. I had bought it for Mia. Earlier that afternoon, I had gone to visit her at the group shelter where she'd been placed temporarily. The building wasn't much to look at, peeling paint, cracked sidewalks, but the staff were kind, and the warmth inside didn't come from forced smiles or polished lies. Mia sat cross-legged on a thin mat in the corner of the playroom, clutching a worn stuffed dog. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes full of confusion, a hint of fear, but no tears. I crouched down beside her, hands on my knees. "Hey, sweet pea," I said softly. She blinked. "Do I have to go back?" Her voice was so small, I nearly missed it. I leaned in, close enough for her to hear me, but quiet enough that the room couldn't. "No, baby," I whispered. "Not ever." She didn't cry. She just leaned forward, pressed her forehead to mine, and held it there. I stayed like that as long as she needed. When she finally pulled back, I reached into my bag. "I brought something for you," I said. She watched carefully as I pulled out the small box and opened the lid. Inside, the porcelain teacup with the forget-me-nots. "It's not cracked," I told her. "You can drink cocoa from it whenever you want." You don't need permission. She picked it up slowly, carefully, like it might shatter if she breathed too hard.
It's pretty, she said.
Can it stay with me?
Of course, I said.
It's yours now. And now, in my kitchen, I looked at the two cups, one cracked, one whole, and realized something simple and deep. We were both finally safe. I reached for my notebook. No longer the old one. A new one I had bought from a shop tucked behind the courthouse. The cover was deep navy blue, and the title embossed across the front in gold. Things I was told never to say. I opened to the first page and wrote, "They never hit me hard enough to kill me, just hard enough to make me quiet. But silence is not my legacy anymore." I paused.
Let the ink dry.
Let the truth breathe. Then I added, "This is protecting a child like I once needed. And that is enough." I closed the journal gently and sat back, looking at those two teacups on the shelf. Not broken, not silenced, just finally safe. A week later, I sat across from Jeanette, my attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a steel-gray bob and the demeanor of someone who had dismantled empires with well-organized folders. She slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. Her tone was calm, firm. "Child Protective Services filed formal charges this morning against both your parents." I didn't speak. I just nodded slowly, heart thudding behind my ribs like it was learning how to beat with purpose again. The charges include child endangerment, falsifying medical records, and interference with mandated reporting, she continued. "And Mia?" I asked, voice tight. Jeanette softened, just slightly. "She's in temporary foster care for now," she said. "But we've initiated your guardianship petition. Given the documentation you've provided, your public testimony, and the support from medical professionals and witnesses, I don't foresee any serious opposition." I looked down at my hands folded in my lap, fingers twitching slightly. Then I spoke, clearly, for the first time with absolute intent. "I want a clause added to the petition." Jeanette raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "I want it on record that Patricia and Charles are never to contact me or Mia. No phone calls. No letters. No supervised visits. Nothing." Jeanette didn't hesitate. She started writing immediately. "We'll make sure it's airtight." When I left her office, the sun was low in the sky, painting long golden shadows across the sidewalk. I stood outside for a moment, taking in the warmth. It wasn't just the sun. It was something bigger. Something I had never felt before. Certainty. As I walked past the corner cafe down the block, I caught sight of the patio table where, years ago, my mother once leaned in close and said, "No one's ever going to believe your little stories, Madison. You always make things sound worse than they are." Funny. The world started believing me the moment I stopped trying to make it sound better. Later that afternoon, I stood outside Mia's school, where she had been temporarily enrolled while in care. I hadn't planned to speak to anyone, but a local news reporter recognized me from the school board video. She looked young, no more than 25, with clear eyes and a microphone that shook slightly in her hand. "Miss Brooks," she asked gently, "would you mind answering one question?" I paused, surprised by how calm I felt. She raised the mic, just a bit. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" I looked past her, toward the empty swing set behind the schoolyard, one seat swaying in the breeze. Then I looked back at the camera and said, "Because no one ever asked how I was doing. They just called me dramatic." The reporter lowered the mic slowly, her eyes wet. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I didn't say it for her. I said it because somewhere another little girl might be listening. And maybe, just maybe, she'll believe her own voice when no one else does." The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. Polished wood, hushed voices, and a quiet anticipation that buzzed under the fluorescent lights like static. Patricia and Charles sat at the defendant's table, each flanked by separate attorneys. Charles looked deflated, his suit hanging off him like it belonged to someone more certain. Patricia's jaw remained tight, her mouth a permanent line of denial. But it wasn't their faces I focused on. It was Mia, sitting beside me at the plaintiff's bench, her hand tucked in mine. She wore a pale blue cardigan with a butterfly pin clipped to the front, one she picked out herself. Her eyes stayed on the judge, wide but not scared. Not anymore. The prosecutor, an older woman named Angela Martin, presented the case with quiet precision. She showed photos, played audio, brought in Dr. Nicole Harper, Miss Clark, and even Mrs. Zerman, the school music teacher who'd reported the bruises. Piece by piece, a lifetime of silence unraveled. The defense tried to paint me as unstable, claimed the recordings were taken out of context, that the bruises were accidents, and that Charles had no knowledge of Mia's treatment. But the judge, a seasoned man named Judge Keller, wasn't swayed by theatrics. He sat forward as the final witness concluded, then looked across the courtroom in quiet judgment. This court has reviewed the physical evidence, listened to first-hand accounts, and considered the psychological impact inflicted on both the primary petitioner, Madison Brooks, and the minor child, Mia Carter. His voice dropped slightly. We find the defendants, Patricia and Charles Brooks, guilty on all counts. Gasps echoed faintly across the courtroom, but I stayed still, clutching Mia's hand a little tighter. This court hereby sentences Patricia Brooks to 8 years in state prison for aggravated child endangerment, evidence tampering, and coercive emotional abuse, with no eligibility for early parole. Patricia's face turned pale. Charles Brooks, the judge continued, is sentenced to 3 years in county correctional custody for criminal negligence and aiding in the concealment of abuse. He will also be permanently stripped of all youth mentorship positions and community leadership roles. Neither of them looked at me, but that was fine. They no longer needed to. As officers cuffed them at their table and began escorting them out, Patricia twisted once, just slightly, as if expecting me to break, or cry, or crumble. I didn't. I sat tall. Because this time, justice wasn't some vague idea I hoped for. It was happening. Tangible.
Real.
And beside me, Mia smiled for the first time all day. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, mostly reporters, a few concerned neighbors, and strangers who'd followed the story. A woman I didn't know touched my shoulder gently and said, "Thank you for speaking up, for not staying quiet." I nodded, but said nothing. Not because I couldn't, but because some victories are loudest in silence. We walked down the courthouse steps together, me and Mia, one step at a time. Not as victim and child, but as survivors. As witnesses who became the voice. It's been a year since that courtroom day. A year since Patricia and Charles were taken away. A year since I looked back at the house I once called home and realized it was never really one at all. Today, I wake up in a small, sun-filled apartment 2 blocks from Mia's new school. The windows are always open. The cupboards are full of groceries I picked out with her. The bookshelf has more coloring books than novels. And right above the sink, where everyone can see, are 2 porcelain teacups, mine, with the old crack, and hers, bright and whole. We drink from them every Sunday morning. It's our quiet tradition. No words, just hot cocoa, buttered toast, and the knowledge that we made it out. Mia has blossomed. She's 8 now. Still quiet, still thoughtful, but her shoulders are looser when she laughs. She wears mismatched socks and sings when she brushes her teeth. At night, she reads aloud from chapter books and sometimes falls asleep halfway through a sentence. She's safe. And I'm whole. After the trial, I accepted a small advance to publish an essay collection based on my journals, titled exactly as it should be. Things I was told never to say. It made the rounds. Quietly viral.
People wrote to me.
Strangers mostly. Survivors.
Teachers.
Women in shelters. Grown men who hadn't spoken to their own siblings in years. And one day, out of the blue, I got an email from Vanessa, my old friend who once warned me about Lily. "I'm sorry I didn't do more," she wrote. "But I'm so proud of what you've done. You didn't just save her. You saved the version of yourself that was still waiting to be rescued." I cried reading that, not because I was sad, but because she was right. Every time I read Mia a bedtime story, every time she calls me Mom, even though we never told her to, every time she runs into my arms and calls this tiny apartment home, I know I rescued not just her, but me too. Tonight, she's brushing her teeth in the other room. The radio plays soft jazz in the background. I'm making tea. 2 cups. Hers already has 2 marshmallows floating on top. She calls from the bathroom. Can I wear my butterfly pajamas again? I smile. You can wear whatever makes you feel strong, baby. And she does. She walks out, tiny and bright in those silly pajamas, and we curl up on the couch.
Safe, loved, and free.
If you connected with my story, thank you for listening all the way through. It wasn't easy to share, but I did it for every person who's ever been silenced, blamed, or told they were too dramatic. You're not. Your story matters. And healing is possible. If you found strength, hope, or even just a little comfort in what I've been through, I'd truly appreciate it if you liked, shared, and subscribed. It helps more people hear stories like mine, stories that deserve to be heard. I'm Madison, and I'm no longer silent. See you in the next one.